What If Harry Was a Girl? Book 1, The Philosopher's Stone. G'day everyone, Rune here, and this is the start of a new What If on this channel, featuring a franchise that has so much potential and that I grew up with. Is a classic example of the struggle of separating the art from the artist, and is kind of a story that can be hard to enjoy as an adult unless you turn your brain off and don't think about it too much. There's a reason manipulative Dumbledore and Dumbledore bashing are such massive tags on AO3. Yes, today we will be starting the story exploring what might have happened had Harry Potter, the boy who lived, been born a girl. I also want to make it absolutely clear that this series is in no way an endorsement of J.K. Rowling and her ideals. Trans rights are human rights, and genuine passion expressed through things like fanfiction and theories are what keep a fandom alive. With all of that said, let's begin the story. We start our story, surprisingly, before Harry, or rather Rosetta Lily Potter, is even born. On the day that Sybil Trelawney gives the prophecy about Voldemort's downfall to Dumbledore. Now, one thing that I think needs to be remembered for this prophecy is that a key and important part of it is that it can apply to two people. Voldemort's decision on which child to go after is a big part of the story and the theme of how you can never outrun fate/death. So, with Rose being a girl, I'm going to say that changes not the prophecy itself, but the way it's delivered. Instead of specifying that it's going to be a boy, it instead keeps the gender of the prophesized child vague, using gender-neutral terms like they and them. This prompts Voldemort to come to the conclusion that the prophecy is referring to the Potter girl, because in his mind, if the prophecy were going to be about a boy, it would have specified. Unfortunately for the Potters, them having a daughter instead of a son does not stop Peter from betraying them or Voldemort turning their home into a wreck. So Rose loses both of her parents, gets her scar, and is placed with the Dursleys. And here is where we start to see some changes. With Rose being a girl, I'm going to say that she inherits a lot more of her mother's features. So instead of being the spitting image of James with Lily's eyes like Harry, she's more the spitting image of Lily with James's hair. And because of this, I think her relationship with the rest of her relatives will be a lot more complicated, especially with Petunia. With Rose looking so much like the sister she both resents and misses, I think Petunia would be a lot more volatile. While she does stop Dudley from physically attacking his cousin under the excuse that it's socially unacceptable for a boy to hit a girl, she does still have Rose sleep in the cupboard. While she does tend to Rose's injuries whenever she gets them, a lot of those injuries actually come from Petunia herself. She does sometimes get Rose a small gift for her birthday or Christmas, but that's not exactly consistent, and it's never like the things she does for Dudley. And while she does give Rose fleeting words of praise once in a blue moon, she never stops her husband's punishments whenever something weird happens, nor does she suggest that they move Rose out of the cupboard. She's the only one of the Dursleys that's nice to Rose, but she's also the only one that hits her. Eventually, the events of Rose getting her letter happen, and she's moved into Dudley's second room, before the whole mess with Vernon dragging them all to a dilapidated shack on a rock. During this time, Petunia is at her most volatile, which results in Rose having more than a few bruises hidden under her shirt by the time Hagrid arrives. But this meaning goes almost exactly like it does in canon, only with Petunia's rant also having an undercurrent of sadness and fear. One which Rose is a little too young to truly understand just yet. The next day, Hagrid takes Rose to Diagon Alley, and that whole thing goes as in canon, right up until Hagrid runs off to get them some ice cream and Rose goes into Madame Malkin's. Like in canon, this is Rose's first encounter with Draco, but this time I'm going to say it goes slightly differently. Just like in canon, Draco has no idea that this is the Rosetta Lily Potter, the girl who lived. But unlike in canon, he's not talking to another boy, but a girl. And if there's one thing I think we can all agree in regards to Pure Blood Society, it's that they are very traditionalist. So Draco would have been taught from a very young age that he has to be a gentleman to young ladies. Now, I see you in the audience about to bring up the fact that he's an absolute brat and a jerk to Hermione. But that's after they start school and he knows Hermione is a Muggle-born. Here, Rose is a complete stranger and, for all he knows, could very well be a pure-blood heiress from overseas who's going to be a kind of foreign exchange student at Hogwarts. Either way, he's not going to take the risk of insulting the daughter of a noble house because he knows that he'd be in big trouble if he did. So, rather than starting up the conversation by going on about what he wants his father to buy for him, he instead asks Rose if she's traveling alone. Rose tells him that she's being escorted by an employee of Hogwarts, to which Draco asks her why her parents aren't escorting her, pointing out that even Muggle-born children usually collect their supplies with at least one parent, just catching himself from making a mudblood comment. Rose explains that her parents died when she was a baby and makes a joke about how her relatives would rather die than take her to a magical street to buy magical supplies for her magical school. Draco, realizing that he's committed a faux pas, immediately apologizes for bringing it up, at which point Rose is told that her robes are done and she starts to prepare to leave. Before she goes, however, Draco holds out his hand to her and tells her that his name is Draco Malfoy. Due to their interaction being a lot more polite and amicable, Rose accepts the handshake and tells him that her name is Rose. However, before she is able to tell him her last name, there is a knock on the window and she turns to see Hagrid standing just outside with some ice cream for them, which thoroughly distracts her as she rushes out of the shop to greet him. From there, things sync up with canon, with Rose getting the brother wand and Hedwig, except for one teeny tiny little moment that is going to have a big impact later. Rose does not ask Hagrid about the Hogwarts houses. Draco never brought them up, so Rose never brings them up with Hagrid, and thus she never finds out about any of the house's stereotypes, nor does she find out that Voldemort was in Slytherin. And that is going to have quite a few repercussions later on. We now skip ahead to the day that Rose is to go to Hogwarts, and again, that plays out the same, with Rose meeting the Weasleys and sharing a compartment with Ron. And again, the two strike up a pretty fast friendship. She also meets Neville and Hermione as they're looking for Trevor, though in this continuity, Rose is a little bit more uncomfortable with Ron being mean to the two of them. Things only change when Draco shows up. Just like in canon, he is looking for the famous Rosetta Potter, the girl who lived, and upon entering the compartment he finds Rose, the nice girl he met at Madame Malkin's. He greets her with a smile, completely missing Ron, who is right there, and introduces her to his two offsiders, Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle. Rose greets them with a big smile, while Ron is just kind of sitting there in complete shock. Before the redhead can recover enough to say or do anything, Draco apologizes that this meeting is going to be so brief, but he's currently looking for someone and he wants to make sure he catches them before they get to Hogwarts. As soon as Draco is gone, Ron tells Rose about the reputation the Malfoys have and that they'd supported Voldemort. But Rose tells Ron that Draco has been nothing but nice to her since they met, and he didn't say a single nasty thing to Ron the whole time he was here. Ron groans and says that that's because he didn't realize that Ron was there. Rose, being the more mature one, tells Ron that she's sure that the two of them can work through their differences because they're both clearly good people. Ron simply huffs, clearly unconvinced. We now jump ahead to the sorting ceremony, where the dominoes that were set up now come crashing down. For one, this is the first time that Rose's full name has been said out loud, and it causes her to flinch. With the Dursleys being who they are, I think Rose's full name would have been a bit of a sticking point, hence why she always refers to herself as Rose. Just a little bit of flavor text I wanted to add. And now we come to the biggest change that everything else has caused. For when the hat is placed on her head, Rose does not have any aversion to being placed in Slytherin. Up until now, Draco has been nothing but nice to her. And she doesn't know about Voldemort being from Slytherin due to that conversation with Hagrid never coming up. So at this point, Rose is very open to being in Slytherin. Draco is nice to her, she doesn't know about Voldemort, and she really doesn't want to go back to the Dursleys. And I think that the thing that would really cinch it is that in the moment where Harry asks the hat to not put him in Slytherin, Rose asks it to put her somewhere where her parents will be proud of her. The hat, having known both James and Lily, would know that they would be proud of their daughter no matter where she is. But clearly, Rose doesn't, and that is something that she's going to need to understand. Putting her in Gryffindor wouldn't help her realize this, as both of her parents were in Gryffindor, so it instead puts her into Slytherin. As soon as Rose sits down, Draco is asking why she hadn't told him that she was Rosetta Potter, mentioning that he had spent the entire train ride looking for her. He is a little concerned when he sees the suppressed flinch, but still wants his answers. Rose, deciding that honesty is the best policy in this case, tells him that it was originally an accident, as she'd gotten distracted. But she's also really glad that she didn't, because it let her meet another friend that she wouldn't have if everyone knew who she was and was swarming her on the train. At that, she turns back to the group of students still waiting to be sorted and waves at Ron, only to be confused when he turns away. One of the biggest struggles I had with this first book was figuring out if Ron and Rose would remain friends even after Rose got put into Slytherin. And after having a long talk about it with my friend Pickled Dill, go check out his What If Sirius Raised Harry series, we came to the conclusion that the answer was a sad no. Ron, for all of his good qualities in the books, sadly has a history of completely ditching Harry when he feels like he's being left behind, forgotten, or betrayed. There are two big examples of this. One is with the Horcrux in Deathly Hallows, which, granted, could be argued is partly the Horcrux's fault. But the other, Ron has zero excuse, and it is when Harry's name comes out of the Goblet of Fire. Ron also has an extreme prejudice against the Slytherins, so I'm sadly going to have to say that Ron and Rose aren't going to be friends here. However, it is not all doom and gloom, for she still has Draco as a friend, and her reception into Slytherin is very positive and welcoming. Those of you, like me, who grew up on the movies and either have not read/listened to the books or have only just started, may not know this, but in the books, it's mentioned that there was a belief among the followers of Voldemort that Harry could be his second coming, which was quickly disproven when he was sorted into Gryffindor. Here, however, Rose is in Slytherin, so those beliefs haven't been disproven in the minds of the pure-blood supremacists yet. So Rose is going to be treated quite nicely. Let's see how long this lasts. And so begins Rose's first year at Hogwarts. Her house is treating her nicely. She's sad about her budding friendship with Ron going poof, but is happy to have a friend in Draco. And eventually, we arrive at the first potions lesson. Just like with Petunia, Rose looking so much like her mother on top of being in Slytherin changes the dynamic between her and Snape. Not only is he now her head of house, but I think the fact that she looks so much like Lily and is in Slytherin and is friends with Draco would all make it very hard for him to see her as a mini James. So when the class begins, he doesn't make that comment about Rose being the school's new celebrity. And when he starts asking potions questions, that also goes differently. He asks Rose the question about Asphodel and Wolfsbane because, despite it being an NEWT level question, its hidden meaning has been spoiled to death on the internet. But he doesn't ask her the other questions, nor does he draw attention to her lack of knowing the answer. Instead, he goes around the room asking other children random on-level questions, giving the impression that he's simply gauging the general level of where everyone has read up to in the text. As a result of this much more positive interaction with Snape, and the fact that he would actually aim to help her learn due to her being in his house, I think Rose would start to show a real talent in potions. For one, a little Harry Potter trivia for you, the Potters got their fortune because their ancestor and originator of their family name, Linfred of Stitchcombe, aka the Potterer, invented several potions including the precursors to Skele-Gro and Pepper-Up. Then Fleamont, Harry's grandfather, quadrupled it by inventing Sleek Easy's hair potion. James himself is implied to be very good with potions, being able to make the Animagus potion at 15, and Lily is stated several times to have been great at potions, being one of Slughorn's favorite students. So I think the potential for being able to excel in the subject is there, even in Harry. He just never gets the chance to bring it out because Snape was a jerk and Harry decided that there was no point in even trying in his class. And by the time Slughorn came along, he was already way behind everyone else. It is also mentioned in the Harry Potter fandom quite a lot that Harry was cooking for the Dursleys by the time he could reach the stove. And what are potions but cooking with a few extra steps? Here, however, with a teacher that is invested in seeing her succeed, I think we'll start to see that little talent rise to the surface. And as a result, the child of James Potter goes from being Snape's most disliked student to being one of his favorites. However, things sadly don't stay sunshine and rainbows for long, as the flying lesson inevitably comes around. And, just like in canon, Draco steals Neville's Remembrall, and just like Harry, Rose stands up to Draco to get it back. Now, I see you all asking why this would happen. Draco and Rose are friends now. Why would he pick on Neville? Why would Rose stand up to him, especially if he's literally her only friend right now? Well, one thing that needs to be remembered is that Draco is a bit of a prat before the meeting on the train even happens. And while at Hogwarts, he picks on people completely independent from anything to do with Harry. Yes, here, he and Rose are friends, but a couple of weeks with Rose being her kind-hearted self isn't going to undo years of reinforced bad behavior. As for why Rose would stand up to her only friend, well, I think Dumbledore said it best in the last chapter of The Philosopher's Stone. It takes a great deal of courage to stand up to your enemies, but a great deal more to stand up to your friends. And Harry is brave, no matter the universe, and has a very strong moral compass. So, of course, Rose is going to stand up to Draco and tell him to stop being a prat. Draco, not used to people standing up to him, let alone a friend, and not wanting to lose face in front of the other Slytherins, still refuses to give it back, and we get the moment of Rose catching it. Like in canon, this gets her made Seeker only for the Slytherin team this time, because Snape very much cares about winning and is, surprisingly, a Quidditch hooligan. This incident would also cause a rift between Rose and Draco, as he had just acted like her cousin and she would thus be very mad at him. And Draco, being Draco, is much too proud to admit that he was in the wrong. Though Snape is still squarely in his mentor role because I think he would have the common sense to ask Rose what exactly happened, and even with Rose covering for Draco by not telling Snape the whole truth, all he'd need to do is ask the rest of the students present. This whole mess also means that the warm reception from the rest of her house is now thoroughly gone. However, have no fear, because Rose does not remain friendless for long, as she gains a new best friend in the form of Neville. Why? Well, she did stand up for him, not only against another Slytherin, but against someone that had been, at the time, her only friend. Also, Neville has never really shown any real care for the rivalry between Gryffindor and Slytherin, and he's kind of an outsider even in his own house for a majority of the first book. Be it everyone laughing at him when he comes into the common room under the effects of a leg-locking jinx, or when he, Harry, and Hermione lose 150 points in one night, he's not really well treated by the majority of the Gryffindors for most of the book. So, I think with Rose's friendship with Draco not really there anymore, and her being given the cold shoulder by everyone in her house, they would easily be able to relate to each other and would easily become friends. This isolation, and in particular the animosity she receives from Pansy, one of her roommates, also causes her to start using the bathroom on the second floor, which all the other girls avoid, just to avoid them. As a result, she ends up meeting the ghost named Moaning Myrtle. However, unlike most of the ghost's interactions with the living, Rose's situation actually somewhat endears her to Myrtle as a fellow outcast. So she allows Rose to use her bathroom without issue and even scares away the other Slytherin girls on the rare occasion that they think of looking for her there. Throughout all of this, Draco is a mess of wounded pride, anger, and regret? Not only did Rose make a fool of him in front of their housemates, but now she's buddying up with Longbottom? But somewhere deep down, I think he does realize that he kind of did this to himself. He's the one that stole Neville's Remembrall and insulted Neville, even though he's not quite ready to admit that he's the one that was in the wrong. Eventually, like in canon, Rose gets her Nimbus. However, unlike Minerva, Severus is a sneaky Slytherin and knows not to have it delivered in the middle of the Great Hall if he wants to keep Rose being on the Quidditch team a secret from the other students for now. And so, Rose is called into Snape's office and is given it directly by her head of house. She then immediately asks Snape if she can take it to the Quidditch pitch with Neville to fly it around, and he agrees, on the condition they have supervision. Rose quickly agrees and goes to find her friend. Rose quickly finds Neville in the halls and motions for him to follow her. As the two begin to make their way to the pitch, Ron marches up to them and begins to call Rose mean things. Remembering how Rose stood up for him, Neville nervously stands up for her, calling her the most noble, kind, and wonderful person he's ever met, and a better friend than Ron deserved. Furious, Ron challenges him to a duel, which Neville agrees to, not wanting to back down from protecting his first real friend. Rose does not think that this is a good idea, and Hermione, who'd overheard, agrees, while also expressing surprise that Rose is voicing that kind of opinion, considering what happened at their flying lessons. Rose tells her that it's impolite to eavesdrop and that she's not prefect, head girl, or a professor, so she's in no position to lecture others. Besides, the flying lesson was completely different. She was getting stolen property back. This is just Weasley wanting to hurt someone for the sake of his wounded pride, and Neville being too nice and timid to tell him to sod off. Hermione is about to make a snide remark at that when Rose continues. She explains that she's not planning on letting Neville get in trouble just because some prejudiced jerk doesn't like that she's in Slytherin and Neville is her friend. She's getting Snape. That's right! I think with Snape having a strong mentor-mentee dynamic with Rose, and the fact that unlike McGonagall, he's not deputy headmaster and thus would be a lot more available, Rose would be a lot more inclined to go to him if there was a problem. And with Rose very quickly becoming one of, if not his favourite student, he would be more than willing to listen. So they go to him and he tells them that he'll take care of it. That night, however, Rose hears that Neville and Ron's duel is still going forward and is unable to find Snape to tell him. Fearful that her friend will get hurt, she sneaks out of the dorms, only noticed by Draco, who'd been in the common room wanting to get away from Crabbe and Goyle's snoring. Rose is almost to the trophy room when she spots both Neville and Hermione, who are looking just as frazzled as her. Hermione explains that they'd heard Ron whispering to Seamus about some horrible prank he was going to play on Rose that night, as payback for snitching to Snape about the duel. Neville wanted to come warn her. Hermione said that they should have found a teacher, but Neville was worried that by the time they found McGonagall, Rose would already be hurt. Rose explains the rumors that she'd heard in the common room and had been unable to find Snape. It's at this moment that they hear Filch coming and run, finding themselves in the room with Fluffy. They very quickly get out of there and Rose walks with the Gryffindors to their common room, thanking them both for coming to save her. Hermione tells her that, in light of the circumstances, she'll choose to blame this on Weasley. As they get to the portrait, they are found by Snape, who asks exactly what they are all doing out of bed and out of their dorms. Rose jumps in to defend her best friend and tentative new friend, telling her head of house that it's all her fault, explaining that she'd heard other kids talking in the common room around curfew about how Weasley was still holding Neville to the duel. When she'd been unable to find Snape, she panicked and came running to try and stop the duel. Turns out, the rumour had been a prank from Weasley as payback for telling on him. Neville and Hermione had heard him whispering about it and had come to warn her, but they hadn't been able to find her before curfew. Snape sighs, applauding them for trying to find a teacher first, but points out that they could have called their house Ghost. As they're dead, they don't need to sleep and thus will often act as stand-ins for heads of house when they're on patrol at night, and will either act on the concerns of the students or relay messages from students to their heads of house. The ghosts are here to help the students and faculty. He tells the trio that he'll be lenient on them this time, as it's mostly the Weasley boys' fault. As such, he will only be giving each of them a detention. However, their detentions will be served separately, and he will also be informing McGonagall about what has happened. He also assures them that Ron will also be receiving punishment for this debacle, though they will not be privy to it. With all of that said, he also warns them that if he catches them wandering the halls of Hogwarts at night again, the consequences will be much more severe. The three nod their heads and Snape ushers the Gryffindors back into their dorm before leading Rose back to the dungeons. It's only as Rose is finally settling down to sleep that she wonders why Snape was outside the Gryffindor dorm. The next morning, the Gryffindors and Slytherins awaken to discover that 30 points have been taken from Gryffindor and Ron has received a month's worth of detention. As for the detention of our main trio, Hermione ends up serving her detention that night with McGonagall, which involves cleaning the classroom after one of Seamus's fire explosions. Neville serves it 2 days later and is tasked with helping Professor Sprout in the greenhouse with some of her more temperamental plants, like the Bubotuber and the Devil's Snare. When Rose finally has her detention, it's a full week later and is with Snape himself. Neville and Hermione feel bad for Rose because they heard that he is one of the worst people to have a detention with. But it turns out that her detention is helping to prepare ingredients for simple potions intended for the hospital wing, like the cure to common poisons. Understandably, Rose is very confused. Why is this her detention? This doesn't feel like much of a punishment. Snape's explanation is that detentions are meant to act as lessons for the students that break the rules. Considering the circumstances around why she and her friends had been out of bed, he thinks his lecture was enough of a lesson on that particular subject. So this detention, she will be learning something else, how to multitask and think critically. For the rest of the detention, Rose and Snape prepare potions. All the while, he's telling her about several different potions that also use these particular ingredients, and quizzing her on how much of the lecture she's able to retain. She's particularly interested in the potions that let someone walk through fire, thinking that it would be really handy to keep a vial of it on hand for whenever she has a class with Seamus. Only to be disappointed when Snape informs her that the potion only allows the drinker to walk through very specific types of magic fire, and thus won't do her any good in the scenario she's imagining. We now skip again to the day of Halloween. At the end of a very long day, Rose enters the bathroom on her way to the Great Hall to meet up with Neville and Hermione when she hears someone crying. Rose quickly discovers that it's Hermione, and discovers that Ron had said some really mean things about her, not the least of which being that she's a house traitor with no friends and that she doesn't belong in Gryffindor. Rose tells her that he's wrong, and that she's a brilliant and wonderful witch with so much to offer. She won't deny that Hermione can be a bit intimidating with all of her insistence on being the one to answer questions in class, but she's just eager to learn. And Rose thinks that it takes a lot of courage to continue to be unapologetically yourself no matter what anyone says. She tells Hermione that Ron doesn't know what he's talking about, because Hermione is just as much a Gryffindor as Rose is a Slytherin. This speech earns a weak giggle from Hermione, but it's still a good few minutes before she's able to calm down enough to where she feels she can leave the stall. After the bushy-haired girl washes her face, they leave the bathroom to head to the Great Hall, only to be hit by a truly disgusting smell. Looking down the hallway, the two girls spot a giant hulking form carrying a tree trunk of a club. A troll. For a moment, Hermione is frozen with fear, but after years of living with the Dursleys, Rose's reaction time and flight instinct is much higher than the average child. And so, she grabs Hermione and begins to pull her down the hall in the opposite direction of the troll. Unfortunately, this causes them to draw the troll's attention and it begins to give chase. The girls just manage to turn the first corner when Gamma Farley, the female Slytherin prefect, appears in front of them. Quickly assessing the situation, she shouts out an Expelliarmus at the troll, sending its club flying away. Then, while the beast is preoccupied with getting its club back, she begins to rush the girls away, aiming to get them somewhere where they can safely hide until the teachers arrive. They soon reach a classroom and Gemma rushes the girls inside before slamming the door closed and reinforcing it with a couple of spells. Hermione, very much panicked, asks if that's really going to keep a troll out, rattling off a whole slew of facts about trolls that she's randomly read. Gemma assures her that they'll be fine. Trolls aren't exactly known for their attention spans, and one of two things will happen long before the door gives out. Either the teachers will show up or the troll will get bored and leave. A loud shout and a crash echoes from the other side of the door. Well, I think that answers which one of those two just happened. A moment later, the door is flung open to reveal Snape, Minerva and Quirrell not far behind him. Behind the group of teachers, the troll is lying on the floor completely knocked out. With the troll dealt with, Severus, being the first in the room, demands to know what happened and if anyone is hurt. Gemma informs the teachers that Draco had told her that Rose had not been in the Great Hall when Quirrell came in screaming about the troll. As prefect, she'd come looking for Rose to ensure her safety, and had been led to them running from the troll by their screams. She also tells them that she's already awarded him 10 points for noticing and getting her, despite the difficulties that he and Rose have been having recently. While Gemma is explaining the situation, Rose notices blood on Severus's leg and worries that he'd gotten hurt during the confrontation with the troll. Only, upon a second look, she notices that the wound looks more like bite marks, like the ones she's seen Aunt Marge's dog Rapper cause. Before she can ponder on this any further, she's brought back to the present by Snape ushering her and Gemma back to the Slytherin dorms. Rose would have put it out of her mind if Snape hadn't ended up absent from class a few days later thanks to said injury getting an infection. Time skip again and we come to the Slytherin-Gryffindor game where, just as in canon, Rose gets jinxed. And yes, Hermione thinks that it's Snape. And that all plays out the same, with Rose, just like her canon counterpart, almost swallowing the golden snitch, winning the match for her house. This time, however, when Hermione brings up her suspicions about Snape, Neville points out that counter curses also require maintained eye contact, and Snape could have easily been doing that in order to save Rose. It's pretty obvious that she's his favourite. Hermione points out that the jinx stopped right after she set his cloak on fire, but Neville points out that it actually happened a few seconds before Snape stopped looking at her. Clearly, Snape's cloak being on fire had nothing to do with it. Hermione, exasperated, asks if it's not Snape, then who could it possibly be, and it's at this point that Rose pipes up and suggests that it could be who let the troll in and who Snape followed to the three-headed dog. Hagrid, who'd been present for this conversation, pipes up, asking how they know about Fluffy and what Rose is talking about. Rose explains that she saw a bite wound on Snape's leg the night of Halloween, and if the troll couldn't figure out how to open a door, how could it have gotten into the castle all on its own? She thinks that someone let the troll in to distract everyone so they could get past Fluffy, but Snape suspected something and went to investigate, only for him to get bitten by the dog. All of this speculation inevitably leads to Hagrid letting slip about Nicholas Flamel, and the main trio going into a research frenzy. Eventually, Christmas rolls around and the vast majority of the student body leave for the holidays, including Neville, Hermione, and all of Slytherin except for Rose. However, Draco doesn't taunt Rose over staying like he does with Harry. He just quietly leaves. And with all of Slytherin gone, Rose is feeling more alone than ever. Before, she could spend most of her time in the library with Hermione and Neville, and even if the reception from her housemates was hostile, at least they acknowledged that she exists. With the whole dorm completely empty, it's more than a little unsettling. Her mood is slightly lifted on Christmas Day when she walks into the Slytherin common room to discover a pile of presents next to one of the couches. With no one else in the dorms, there's no one else they could be for but her. After having a quick look at the name written on them to confirm it, she begins to open her gifts, feeling truly cared about. From Hermione, she gets a large box of chocolate frogs. From Neville, she gets a baby Wiggin tree, and from Hagrid, she gets a flute. She even gets a small gift from the Dursleys in the form of a small rose hairpin, though she thinks that this is more from Petunia than Dudley or Vernon. However, there are a few other gifts that give her pause. One is a book on more advanced potions which she receives from an unknown person who only signs the note Merry Christmas with a little drawing of a star. One is a sweater from Mrs. Weasley, who explains in her card that Fred and George had told her that they'd overheard her talking to Neville about how she didn't often get presents for Christmas and had wanted to ensure that she got at least one. And, of course, the Cloak of Invisibility with its iconic and oh-so-cryptic note. And when she tries it on, she discovers that it turns her invisible. After safely storing away her other presents, putting on her Weasley sweater and putting the hairpin in her hair, she heads out to breakfast. The moment she sits at the Slytherin table, she's approached by an angry Ron who demands to know where she got her sweater. Before Rose can respond, however, the twins pop up, seemingly out of nowhere. Before either of the first years can react to their sudden appearance, Fred has hooked his arms under Ron's shoulders, lifted him up off the ground, and is now carrying him away while telling Ron, Now, Ron, none of that, it's Christmas. Now come along, old chap, I do believe you left your sweater in the common room. While Fred continues to carry Ron off, George turns to Rose, asking if she's okay. Rose thanks them for their timely intervention and for the sweater before asking why they'd asked their mother to make one for her. George, wanting to be honest, explains that after she'd been so kind and such a good friend to Neville and all of the grief that Ron has been giving her and her group, it didn't feel right for her not to get something on Christmas. Remember, Fred and George are pranksters, but they are also really thoughtful when they want to be and have their own very strong moral compasses. They've also never shown a bias towards Slytherin and show quite a few traits of that house. So, with Rose being a kind-hearted person, her only two friends being away for Christmas, her staying at Hogwarts for Christmas, and all of the grief that Ron has been giving her, I think it makes complete sense for them to want to do something nice for her. Later that day, they even bring her into a snowball fight that they'd started with the other students that are still at Hogwarts. During this, Ron finally crosses the line with Rose by insulting Neville and Hermione, and she decides to get back at him. Going up to the twins with a snowball, she asks them if there's a spell to change its color, and gets them to change its color to yellow. She then proceeds to throw it at Ron, freaking him out, and inspiring Fred and George to make the snowball fight a bit more colorful. Think paintball, but with snowballs. That night, not wanting to stay in the far too quiet dorms, Rose takes her cloak and wanders the halls, eventually coming across the mirror of Erised. And, as with Harry, what Rose sees in the mirror is her mother and father. Eventually, she's forced to leave after hearing the sounds of a teacher on patrol, but makes a promise to return the next night. The next day, Rose barely eats, which gets concerned questions from Fred and George. Rose assures them that she's fine, but they remain unconvinced. That night, she returns to the mirror only to be found by Snape? Let me explain. With Rose not being in Gryffindor and having no one in the castle to take to the mirror with her, I don't think Dumbledore would see the point in waiting to confront her on the third night. It's also kind of implied that he knew about her being there from the first night, at least that's my interpretation. So he would have already known about her being there and what she sees by the second night. I'm also going to say that he sets up Snape to confront her because of a few things. 1. Snape has already established himself as a mentor figure to Rose. 2. He was once best friends with Lily and thus would probably be able to better relate to Rose and thus talk her down. And 3, it could open the possibility of Rose learning about her parents, or at least Lily, from Snape. Snape's first order of business is not asking why she's out of bed, but where she got that cloak. Nervously, she explains that it was given to her on Christmas and that it apparently belonged to her father. Snape looks like he's about to argue until he thinks about it for a moment and says that that actually explains a lot. He then turns back to the matter at hand, asking if she knows what the mirror does. At Rose's guess of it showing dead family members, Snape can't help but wince. He then tells her to read the inscription on the mirror backwards. and when she does, she realizes what the mirror does. Snape tells Rose that the mirror is incredibly dangerous and has caused the death and madness of many. He would much prefer that the mirror was not in the castle around impressionable and vulnerable children who could easily fall under its thrall. But sadly, Dumbledore needs it for something. He looks at the mirror before wincing and turning back to Rose, saying that it's long past time they return to the dorms. But before they do, he wants her to swear that she will never seek out the mirror again. While he could not fault her for falling under the artifact's sway, it would only bring her pain in the long run and make her parents' sacrifice all for naught. After getting Rose's promise, the two begin to make their way back to the dorms. Before they leave the room, she looks up at her head of house and asks what he saw in the mirror. For a moment, it seems that Snape is either going to ignore the question or tell her not to poke her nose into things that are none of her business. But then, Rose is surprised when he says that he supposes it's only fair, since he now knows what she saw. He tells her that he sees himself reconciling with a friend he lost long ago, and being introduced to her daughter. Rose looks up at him, wondering who his friend could possibly be. Seeing the empathetic look on her face, Snape decides to change the topic, telling her that they need to get her back to the dorms, and he needs to think of a suitable punishment for her. At her frightened expression, he tells her to calm down, as he'll be lenient this time as she was under the mirror's thrall. But he had better not catch her out of bed a third time, or she will be in detention for the rest of the year. In the end, her punishment is a detention in the library, where she has to write a 3 rules of parchment essay on the potential dangers of magical artifacts and how to identify them. We now skip to when Neville and Hermione return from holidays, and she tells them about what happened while they were gone, while they're in the library once again looking for Nicholas Flamel. Hermione is torn between horror at Rose being out of bed 2 nights in a row, and disappointment that she didn't spend her time trying to find out who Flamel is. While Neville is a lot more sympathetic to Rose over exactly what she saw in the mirror, completely understanding that longing to have your parents by your side. But he does also agree with Snape that the price that Rose could pay for looking in the mirror is not worth it, and is very grateful that Snape got her away from it before she completely fell under its thrall. He also explains to Rose and Hermione that invisibility cloaks are extremely rare and usually only last a few years. He tells them that the longest he's ever heard of one lasting is this one that one of his uncles had bought, which had lasted about 20 years. For Rose to have one that's lasted 2 generations is nothing short of miraculous. Just as they're getting ready to leave, they overhear a group of Hufflepuffs a few tables over talking about how the only 2 Slytherins that aren't horrible people are Rose and Draco. Hearing this, Rose is surprised, remembering how Draco acted at the start of the year. Neville also realizes that, while the other Slytherins like to hex him, Draco hasn't done anything to him since the flying lesson. Rose doesn't have much time to think on this, however, as she and the rest of the Quidditch team are being kept quite busy by Flint in preparation for their next game. Flint doesn't want a repeat of the last game, and thus is making everyone read plans for how to handle a situation where one of them is dealing with a jinxed broom. Because while Rose isn't exactly welcome in Slytherin by those that supported Voldemort, there are still those that are neutral and don't care about all of the politics, are against him for one reason or another, or just have no idea about any of it. Those people just mostly stay silent because the supporters are a very loud and very active majority, and they don't want to get caught in the crossfire. And Marcus's stance on that is never stated. His only characterization in the books is that he's willing to play dirty to win, and in the movies he's kind of a non-entity. I didn't even know his name was Marcus Flint until I started getting more into the fandom. It's not even mentioned anywhere what side he was on during the war or if he was even part of it. So my interpretation is that he's one of the neutrals. He's not on Voldemort's side, he's not on Rose's side, he just wants to win at Quidditch. And with Rose being the best and youngest Seeker in a century, he's going to make sure that they're going to be able to keep her on the team. Which is why he is very happy to tell the team that Snape is going to be refereeing for their next match against Ravenclaw. All of this makes Rose feel a lot better about getting back out on the pitch, as it means that even if something does happen again, there'll be plans in place to make sure she doesn't get killed. On the day of the match, when it's revealed that Dumbledore is in attendance, she's confused as to why Snape looks annoyed, until one of the other neutrals on the team explains to her that while Snape really likes Quidditch and winning, he hates refereeing. He probably only volunteered because of what happened last time. Rose catches on to what her teammate is laying down almost immediately, and feels kind of bad for Snape. Meanwhile, up in the stands, Neville and Hermione are shocked to find Draco sitting near them. Even though they ask him why he's there, he doesn't pay them any mind, focusing completely on the game. He doesn't even rise to Ron baiting him into a fight, keeping his eyes completely on what's happening in the match. When Rose catches the snitch, Neville notices a tension that he hadn't previously realized Draco was holding suddenly release. Without saying a word to any of them, he gets up and walks away. Later, Hermione and Neville are telling Rose about what happened while eating some of her chocolate frogs in celebration of Slytherin's win. Rose agrees that it does seem a little odd. Why would he sit near them and then ignore them? Why was he so tense during the game, and why was he paying so much attention to it? However, these questions are quickly forgotten as she pulls out yet another card, seeing that it's another Dumbledore. And there, right on the back, is the name Nicholas Flamel. At long last, the main trio find the answer to what Fluffy is guarding, the Philosopher's Stone. However, with Snape thoroughly ruled out as the potential thief, they have no idea who could possibly be trying to steal the stone. There's no way they're going to ask Snape who he suspects, because that could get Hagrid in trouble, and Rose suspects that it would make him start paying more attention to them to make sure they don't do anything stupid rather than on the stone. And unlike Harry, Rose doesn't see Snape interrogate Quirrell, as this happens on a different day. And even if it were to happen on the day of the Slytherin-Ravenclaw match, she trusts Snape and would have zero reason to follow him into the Forbidden Forest. With the mystery of the stone solved and no leads on who the potential thief is, the trio return to their day jobs of school students, with Hermione stressing out over exams 10 weeks before they start. Seriously, how has this girl not suffered an aneurysm yet? While in the library studying, with Rose and Neville helping each other with their herbology and potions homework respectively, they discover Hagrid is also there. After he leaves in quite the hurry, Rose looks at the section that he'd been taking books from and discovers that they're all about dragons and dragon care. Pointing this out to the others, she tells them that Hagrid always wanted a dragon and wonders if he managed to get his hands on one. Neville blanches, telling her that keeping a dragon as a pet is illegal. It'd be like a muggle keeping a tiger for a pet. Rose's heart sinks and she tells them that they need to go see him right now. So, together, they all rush to Hagrid's hut, where they find all of the curtains drawn. Uh-oh. Knocking on the door, they ask Hagrid to let them in, which he reluctantly does, and they're hit by a sudden wave of heat. Rose begins looking around the moment she steps in, and her eyes land squarely on a large black egg in the middle of the fire in the fireplace. Taking a deep breath to still and calm her nerves, she turns to Hagrid and begs him to tell her that that thing isn't what she thinks it is. Hagrid attempts to stall by saying that that entirely depends on what she thinks it is, only to be left floundering when Rose says that she thinks that it's a dragon egg. Shocked, Neville asks where he even got it, and Hagrid explains about the hooded figure in the pub. The three students then begin telling Hagrid that he can't keep it, with him brushing off all of their concerns until Rose decides it's time to pull a Slytherin move. Folding her arms, she asks Hagrid what he intends to do with the dragon once it's hatched. He's got responsibilities as Hogwarts' only gameskeeper. What about all the other animals of Hogwarts that depend on him? Is he just going to abandon them for a dragon? And what of Fang? He's been with Hagrid ever since he was a puppy. How is he going to feel when Hagrid kicks him out of the house to make room for his shiny new dragon? And he had better not say that it won't come to that. Because if real dragons are anything like the ones in Muggle storybooks, then that dragon is going to grow, and it's only a matter of time before it starts seeing Fang as dinner. and she, for one, is not going to stand for that. Hagrid looks down abashed, admitting that he hadn't thought of it like that. He then chuckles, saying that she sounded a lot like her mum back when she was a prefect. This makes Rose drop her stern expression and absolutely beam. Hagrid then asks what exactly he's supposed to do with the egg now. Rose tells him that she'd spent quite a bit of time with the Weasley twins over Christmas, and they mentioned that their brother works with dragons in Romania. She can ask them to send him a letter to come pick it up. Then the egg will be able to be given to a mother dragon that can raise it. Hagrid worries about the other dragons being mean to the baby, but Rose tells him not to worry. After all, people always say to never mess with a mother bear's cub, and she can imagine that it'd be the same with dragons. It doesn't take long for the twins to get back to her, telling her the time to take the egg to the astronomy tower for Charlie to pick it up. Unfortunately, the time and date had been written on a slip of paper which Neville ended up dropping. Rose assures him that it's fine, as she and Hermione still remember, and it would have meant nothing to anyone else. On the night that they are going to get the egg to Charlie, however, they arrive at the tower to discover that Draco and McGonagall are also there. When McGonagall demands to know why he's here at such a late hour, he tells her that he left something on the astronomy tower during class, an excuse that McGonagall does not buy one bit. As McGonagall drags Draco off, he drops something that Hermione picks up, discovering that it's the slip of paper that Neville had dropped before. And it's now that Rose remembers that she'd seen Draco in the hall when they'd been whispering about the egg. Hermione's first thought is that he'd come here to try and catch them in the act and get them in trouble. But Rose points out that if that were his goal, he would have said something about them coming here to McGonagall. But he didn't say anything. He even lied about why he was here. Had Draco been covering for them? She quickly puts that aside, remembering that they're working on a tight schedule, and they head up the tower. There, they give the egg to Charlie before heading back down. However, just like in canon, they forget the cloak and are caught by Filch. As a result, both Gryffindor and Slytherin lose 100 points in one night, and Rose, Hermione, and Neville become even bigger social pariahs. But despite all of this, she still can't help wondering why Draco didn't rat them out. Eventually comes the time for their detention in the Forbidden Forest, and this time, Rose and Draco get paired up right from the start, while Neville and Hermione go with Hagrid. I think Hagrid would do this because Draco and Rose are both Slytherins. A Slytherins go together, Gryffindors go together mindset. While they search for the unicorn, Draco is unusually quiet, and Rose eventually takes the opportunity to ask him why he didn't rat her, Neville, and Hermione out to McGonagall. Before he can answer, however, they hear a noise and rush forward to find the unicorn, badly injured but alive. Reason being that, without Draco pranking Neville and the delay of switching groups, they would have found it a good bit sooner. And it's kind of implied that Quirrell had injured it and it ran away, and Quirrell had been forced to go look for it. Why else would it be all alone in the middle of the forest, already hurt, while Quirrell is over near Hagrid, Harry, and Hermione? Fear and hope war within Rose as she runs towards the hurt creature, while telling Draco to shoot the sparks. If they act fast enough, maybe they can still save the unicorn. Pulling off her outer robes, she presses them against the gash in the beautiful creature's side. After a few seconds, there's a flash of green as Draco sends up the sparks to alert the others that they found the unicorn. After a few more seconds with Draco standing away from them, Rose turns to him and tells him to get over here and help her try and save the unicorn. Draco tries to tell her that unicorns don't like males, but she cuts him off, pointing out that they don't really have time to worry about gender right now. They need to stop the blood flow, so hurry up and get over here! Eyes wide, Draco nods before taking off his own outer robe and adding it to Rose's over the unicorn's wound. There's a long moment of silence as they focus on staunching the bleeding. Then, Draco breaks it by telling Rose that it's because he's sorry. Rose turns to him in confused surprise, the only response she can drum up being a flat, "What?" It's hard to see in the gloom of the forest, but she's pretty sure that Draco is blushing, and for a moment, it doesn't seem like he's going to elaborate. But then he explains, "I'm sorry for how I acted at the start of the year, okay? Professor Snape took me aside after the lesson and told me that I needed to decide if I value my own notions of how things should be over a genuine friend. And if it's the former, apologize and make amends. Because if I don't, I might lose the only chance I have. I thought he was just being dramatic, but then there was the troll at Halloween. And you almost fell during the game with Gryffindor. You keep getting into all these frightening situations and I keep thinking that you're going to die and I'm never going to get to say I'm sorry. So, I'm sorry. Rose stares at Draco for a moment, unable to find the words to say. Just as she is about to respond, they hear the sound of slithering from the trees. Turning, they see a dark hooded figure emerging from the trees. Instantly, pain erupts from Rose's scar, causing her to collapse on top of the unicorn. The pain is so overwhelming that she can't hear Draco fearfully calling her name, or see him pointing his wand at the figure with a trembling hand as he desperately tries to think of a spell that could protect them from the strange attacker. The figure is almost on them when something jumps over them, charging at the figure, driving them off. It's still a solid minute or two before the pain in Rose's scar subsides, and she's able to look up at her and Draco's savior, Firenze. With the pain now gone, she quickly turns her attention back to the unicorn, relieved to see that it's still alive. Firenze asks the two children if they're alright, and they tell him that they are, while thanking him for the rescue. Rose then asks just what it was that attacked them. Why was it hurting the unicorns? She then looks sadly at the unicorn in front of them, asking if this one is going to be okay. Firenze assures her that it will be able to recover, thanks to her and Draco's intervention, before giving both of the children an explanation on what unicorn blood is used for, horrifying them both, and gives Rose the clue that she needs to realize that the one they just encountered was Voldemort. At which point, Hagrid, Hermione, and Neville arrive and Firenze returns to his herd. As they're making their way back to Hagrid's hut, with the half-giant carrying the unicorn, with Rose and Draco's robes still covering its injury, Draco asks just what in the heck is going on. Rose tells him to wait until they're on their way back, shooting her eyes meaningfully at Hagrid. After Hagrid dismisses them to head back to their respective common rooms, they begin to walk to the castle alone, and Rose takes the opportunity to bring Draco up to speed on everything that she, Hermione, and Neville have been dealing with that year. Hermione and Neville are at first shocked until Rose explains that Draco apologized and that he'd tried to defend her from Voldemort. This gets the typical reaction, and Rose explains what she'd figured out thanks to Firenze. Before they can separate to go back to their respective common rooms, Draco also apologizes to Neville for what happened during the flying lesson. And when Rose arrives at her room, she discovers that her invisibility cloak has been returned to her. Sometime after this, Draco and Hermione have a confrontation about why Draco doesn't like Muggleborns. And he tells her that it's because Muggleborns have been destroying the culture of the magical world for centuries. He points out how Hogwarts now celebrates Halloween and Christmas instead of Samhain and Yule. His final nail in his argument is to ask Hermione if she were to go to Japan, if she would demand that everyone change their traditions and etiquettes to suit her, or if she would change her behavior to fit with their etiquette and culture. The next day, Hermione comes back and, much to Draco's surprise, demands that he teach her. She tells him that he did kind of have a point in that she's been thinking of the magical world as an extension of Britain rather than its own nation. But Draco can't expect Muggleborns to know about the culture and etiquette of the traditional magical world if no one is even going to teach them. And she refuses to remain ignorant of a culture that she is now supposed to be a part of. So, again, she demands that Draco teach her. And so, with the help of Neville, he does. Hermione and Rose both start getting lessons on traditional wizarding etiquette and culture, which actually ends up bringing the four of them closer together. Rose finds all of this very interesting, and Hermione takes to it like a duck to water, already making plans for celebrating the traditional holidays next year, both at Hogwarts and with her parents. Hermione's enthusiastic acceptance of wizarding holidays and the majority of the culture that he's taught her so far is also a big blow to Draco's own biases. After all, here is physical proof that Muggleborns can adapt to wizard culture, and that some might be really enthusiastic about it, if those that already know the culture will take the time to show them. And you can't stop magical children being born to non-magical families. So isn't teaching the Muggleborns the culture and practices the obvious and easy solution? Eventually, the exams roll around, and despite the stress and fear of knowing that Voldemort isn't far away, Rose can't help but giggle with Draco over Snape making them brew a forgetfulness potion for their potion exam. And people say their head of house has no sense of humour. When the exams are done, Neville notices that Rose doesn't look anywhere near as happy as everyone else and asks her what's wrong. Rose tells her friends about her scar, and Hermione suggests that she go to Madame Pomfrey. When Rose says that she thinks it's a warning, Draco says that he's never heard of curse scars acting as warning systems. But there's also never been a person to survive the killing curse before Rose, so this is rather uncharted territory. Rose then tells them that she's got this feeling that she's forgetting something important, and that if she doesn't remember what it is, something horrible is going to happen. Neville sympathizes, having dealt with that feeling a lot thanks to his forgetfulness, and suggests that they try going over everything that it could be one by one, starting from the beginning of the year. When they get to the Dragon Egg incident, Rose suddenly realizes what it is and begins to run towards Hagrid's hut, calling for Draco, Hermione, and Neville to follow her. As they run, she tells them what she's thinking, berating herself for not seeing it sooner. After getting the confirmation from Hagrid, the quartet begin to run back to the castle, intending on telling Dumbledore what they've discovered. When they realize that none of them know where his office is, Hermione suggests that they ask McGonagall, as she's the deputy headmistress, so she'll be bound to know where his office is. However, they're told by McGonagall that Dumbledore has left for the Ministry, and when they attempt to tell her that someone is after the stone, she tells them to stop talking nonsense. After this failed attempt, Draco suggests that they go to Snape, but Rose reminds them that the last time he went near Fluffy, his leg was almost bitten off and then it got an infection. Snape is the first teacher, the first adult to treat her with kindness without later hurting her, and she is not about to risk him getting hurt again. If Dumbledore is gone, then Voldemort, or whoever's working for him, is probably going to go after the stone tonight. So she's going to have to get to it first. At her friend's protest, she tells them that it's either that or Voldemort comes back and kills her. She refuses to just sit back and wait for him to come after her. And if he doesn't go after the stone tonight, her getting it will be proof enough that it wasn't well guarded. Sure, she might get expelled, but at least Voldemort will still be gone, and she and everyone she cares about will stay alive. With sighs, all three of her friends turn to her as Hermione asks how they're going to do this. At Rose's surprised expression, Neville asks if she really thought that they were going to let her do this alone. Draco comments that someone has to make sure that they don't get killed, earning him a slight smack from Hermione. That night, Rose meets Draco in the common room after lights out, and they both get under her cloak. Draco comments that this explains how she, Neville, and Hermione got to the tower without being seen, though he is disappointed that they forgot to put it back on the way down. They reach the Gryffindor entrance where they find Neville and Hermione waiting for them. Then, together, they head to the third floor corridor. On the way, they run into Peeves, who Draco makes a deal with by telling him where he can find Filch to play a prank on. When they reach the room, they discover that Fluffy is asleep, with a harp at the puppa's paws. Clearly, Rose was right about whoever's after the stone going for it tonight. One by one, the four children use Rose's flute to get through the trapdoor, only to land on Devil's snare, which Neville instantly recognizes. Pulling out his wand, he hesitates, not sure if he'll be able to cast the spell properly. All throughout the year, his spells have been either backfiring or just not working properly. There's no way he can do this. He's brought out of his self-deprecating spiral by Rose's voice. She shouts at Neville that he needs to stop second-guessing himself. He's the best in herbology, he's one of the most amazing friends she could have ever asked for, and he's one of the bravest people she's ever met. So, just this once, can he trust her enough to believe her? Hearing those words, Neville steels himself and casts the spell. In an instant, blue flames burst from the tip of his wand, landing on the Devil's snare and setting it too alight. Within seconds, the Devil's snare retreats from the others, allowing them to free themselves and get away from the killer plant. Once they're all safe, Rose turns to Neville, telling him that he was absolutely brilliant. Neville smiles at her before turning to his wand with an odd look on his face. Noticing this, she asks what's wrong. "This wand used to belong to my father. Gran gave it to me when I got my Hogwarts letter. I think she was hoping that it would make me more like my dad, but I've always felt weird when I use or even hold it. Like I was out of place or I'd missed a step. But now, it almost feels like coming home. Does that make any sense?" Rose tells him that it does, explaining that that's the feeling she gets when she holds her wand. Neville is shocked. This is what holding your wand is supposed to feel like? Wow! With Rose and Draco working together to catch the key while Neville and Hermione stay safely on the ground. Then Draco mastering the chess set while ensuring that all of them stay safe. When they come to the riddle, both Rose and Hermione figure it out together, with Rose finding the potion to move forward while Hermione finds the potion to go back. Rose finds the potion to go forward because she remembers her conversation with Snape way back during her detention with him, when he mentioned this very potion. And Hermione finds the other potion by solving the riddle. And, as in canon, Rose convinces the others to go back, telling them that there's only enough potion for one person and that the longer they stand here arguing, the longer Voldemort or whoever has to get the stone. So she needs them to get Snape and Dumbledore. She's survived on luck so far, but she'd much prefer to stack the deck in their favor if she can. With her friends convinced and on their way back to get help, Rose goes through the fire to confront Quirrell, whom she's very surprised to see. The confrontation goes very similar to canon. However, for what she sees in the mirror, she doesn't have anyone else's desire to nick and, understandably, doesn't want to tell her own since it's so personal. So, she tells Quirrell that she sees herself on platform 9 3/4 with Draco, Hermione, and Neville, and they're all going to be spending the summer together at Neville's place. From there, the altercation plays out as in canon, with Rose getting the stone and Quirrell dying because of the blood protections on her. Side note, does it strike anyone else as messed up that Harry was kind of set up to essentially commit manslaughter at 11 years old? Back on track, the rest of the story plays out much like canon, with Dumbledore giving his explanation about the stone, the cloak, and the magic protecting her. However, he doesn't tell her anything about Snape and her father due to Rose not asking about it. Instead, she asks if the reason Snape is so nice to her and why he's been protecting her all year is because she reminds him of his old friend. Dumbledore smiles at Rose and asks her what she knows of Snape's old friend, to which she tells him not much. Only that they'd had a falling out and he never had a chance to reconcile with her. Dumbledore nods and tells Rose that Snape's friend was a young witch that he'd met before the two of them even came to Hogwarts. She was a Muggleborn, a Gryffindor, a prefect, and a woman that stood for what she believed was right. However, circumstances changed and things became strained between them. And one day, their friendship broke, much like he imagines her and Draco's had at the start of the year. Only, unlike them, Snape and his friend never spoke to each other again. He imagines that Snape sees a lot of himself in his friend in Draco and Rose. Perhaps in part because Rose shares his dearly lost friend's eyes. Rose's eyes widen as she realizes what Dumbledore is implying. Snape's friend was her mom. Later, Rose tells her friends what happened after they split up, and Hagrid gives her the photo album, revealing that both James and Lily were in Gryffindor. This surprises and confuses Rose, which Hagrid notices. Rose explains that when the Hat was having trouble deciding where to put her, she asked it to put her where her parents would be proud of her. She can't understand why it would put her in Slytherin if they were both in Gryffindor. Hagrid smiles sadly at Rose before telling her to think about it. And after a few minutes, she gets it. Finally, it is time for the leaving feast. During this, Dumbledore hands out extra points to Hermione, Neville, Draco, and Rose. And because this is Dumbledore and because of everything else that's happened this year, he juggles the points in just a way where both Gryffindor and Slytherin tie. But instead of having some kind of tiebreaker, he instead announces that both Gryffindor and Slytherin jointly win the House Cup. Time skip to when everyone is at King's Cross. Rose is able to meet the parents/guardians of all of her friends, including Lucius, Narcissa, Neville's grandmother Augusta, and Hermione's mum and dad. When the Dursleys arrive, Vernon tells her to hurry up while brushing off the others, immediately putting the parents on edge. While Vernon storms off, Petunia turns to Rose, noticing that she's wearing the hairpin that she'd sent for Christmas. She looks at it for a moment before telling Rose to say goodbye to her friends, as they need to get home quickly. Draco, still eyeing the Dursleys with suspicion, tells Rose that he'll be writing to her over the summer, and that Rose had better write back or he'll be storming Surrey. Neville pitches in, saying that he'll help. Hermione gives the boys a look like she wants to argue, but then she looks at the Dursleys' retreating backs and tells them to count her in. Rose laughs and tells them that she'll be holding them to that. And that, everyone, is where I'm going to leave the story for now. Join me next time as we get into the events of the Chamber of Secrets. And let me know what you think of all the changes a lack of a Y chromosome has caused. I'm Rune. See you next chapter.